So I'm here with Ian, who is the lead programmer and lead designer on both Frozen Synapse games. And I'm going to ask you first to say hello, Ian.
Hello, everyone.
And secondly, I'm going to ask you some questions about the level generator. So what was the original goal of the level generator in the first Frozen Synapse game?
Well, I knew right from the beginning that I wanted everything to be randomized content. I hate playing the same things twice. As I've said many times before in many different places, Laser Squad Nemesis was the primary inspiration for Frozen Synapse, and one of the things that really bothered me was playing over and over again on the same map. So really, generative content and having each level being completely different every time was there right at the start of the design process. And it's not just those broad concepts. I also have a very strong design belief that starting a new game should be the most exciting part of the game, basically. I always talk about how in card games like poker and bridge, when you pick up a new hand, it's the most exciting time, really. You're seeing what you've got. And that really drives you to keep playing, makes the game much more compulsive. And I think that's a big part of having generative levels, and especially having generated unit starting positions within those generated levels, because rather than the first thing you have to do being boring deploy phase, where you have to make a load of really tough decisions right at the start of the game, which is the worst way of doing things, you start off with a load of situations already set up, and your brain is working out how to optimize those things. So all that stuff works together to make generative content be what I wanted to do to start with. So in terms of what it's got to achieve in the game, first and foremost, the levels have to be good. They have to be differentiated from each other. They have to be interesting. You have to work out whatever game it is you're making, be it Spelunky or Frozen Synapse 2 or something else. You've got to work out what makes your game tick and what levels have to make your game work, and design the generators around that. So basically, the first thing I think we did and that you should do is get an actual level designer to start making canned levels. You play those canned levels, you work out what works, what doesn't, and then you start to get a real understanding of your game. And only then are you in a good position to make a generator for it.
So a lot of that process is about deconstructing what makes a level good in general, and then being able to generalize that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. If you spend all your time focusing on what looks nice, you'll obviously find out that you're not focusing on what plays nicely as well. So those two things are really completely separate concerns. But it's so hard, when you're developing your game at the same time as you're developing your level generator. The game is changing, and you're learning the thing that you've made. Like, you've made a prototype, the prototype's fun. You're still learning about why it's fun. It's such an inspirational process. It's not a very analytical process making a game, designing a game in my experience. And you've got, the final version of the level editor for Frozen Synapse, which I think was very successful, came about when one of our community members, Lix, made a really, really good specific level, and I spent a lot of time trying to analyze that level, working out what made it so good. And for Frozen Synapse, it's really the interplay of open spaces with closed spaces. You have too many closed spaces, it tends to just be too closed down, not enough options, and too much open space, and there's not enough creativity that you can put into it. You get the right flow of open spaces surrounding and enveloping closed spaces, and you get the perfect level.
So do you think you managed to achieve what you wanted to with the generator in FS1?
Yeah, I would say definitely.
Cool. Okay. I think it's quite rare that a designer is that satisfied with something they've done.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, the game helps it so much. The game is such a sort of beautiful mechanics-led game. It just needs the right kind of geometry, and the puzzles just emerge from it. It doesn't require each level to be hugely different or have some massive gadget hook, because the core mechanics are so solid. It's just sort of about rearranging these things, so all the angles are different, the places that you might hide are different, the approaches are different. So I think in some ways, we had an easier time than other games might have. But without a doubt, you can play 20 FS matches and it stays fresh for me.
So how have the goals you're trying to achieve and the approach to achieving those goals changed in Frozen Synapse 2?
Well, I mean, the goals are pretty similar in terms of what a level needs to be mechanically. I know how to make good Frozen Synapse levels. We wanted to make the levels look more interesting, whereas in Frozen Synapse 1 everything was axis-aligned box. We now have curves and rotated lines and everything, and as you can tell from looking at the screenshots, it's really quite dramatically different. None of that really massively changes up the mechanics in any really unexpected ways. It's all geometry, and the mechanics work very, very well with geometry as long as it's clearly presented, and again you get the space right. I think there were probably two separate avenues that I was very interested in taking on. First, I wanted to be able to represent different feeling spaces. So this is really an aesthetic concern to start with, although it kind of leads into different kind of levels. You know, if you want to have a level on a road junction, I wanted that to feel like a road junction, like you're having an escalated conflict on a road, and that just then tends to produce slightly different feeling levels as well. So for me, the first thing I wanted to be able to do was create levels that were as properly generated as Frozen Synapse 1's, but were quite a lot of different scenarios. Frozen Synapse 1 tended to only have these sort of vague office building-y things, and that was one of our primary things, getting it out of just the office building, have lots of different places it could be in. You know, we have a lot more outside stuff. We have trees that make cover. We have the ability to make vehicles in this game. And again, just as long as all of those objects go back to the core ideas of geometry, everything works fine. And the other thing is I wanted to be able to more easily create different starting configurations of unit positions in multiplayer. So it's really important to polish these things. You've got to, you know, even though we are broadly sort of throwing the units around the level and sort of seeing where they land, you've got to work out what doesn't work with that and create rules to stop those things happening. And it turns out that if you want to, say, do something slightly different and start each squad together on the opposite side of a map, that works maybe 1 in 10 times. If I'm playing a lot of multiplayer, I don't want that every time, but I do want that sometimes. So for me, I want to create quite a lot of interesting different scenarios that happen at the right frequency.
Awesome. Okay, so could you explain the system sort of from the ground up to a layperson?
Well, it's not the easiest thing in the world. The Frozen Synapse 1 system, which I'll describe first because it's used for a lot of Frozen Synapse 2 stuff. Basically, you take whatever the level area is. In FS1, it started off being this big rectangle of space, open space, and you randomly choose a corner, and then you randomly put a building of some size in that corner, and then once you've done that, you partition the rest of the space. So it was this empty rectangle. Now it's got a square instead of top right. That's a building. You partition the rest of the empty space into 2 more rectangles. Maybe you can visualize that in your mind if you're mathematical. Maybe you can't, but I will finish the segment quickly. And then you just do it again with those 2 separate places. So you just kind of recursively do that algorithm, and that's sort of it's a really simple thing, but it ends up producing really nice organic looking levels that have the right kind of open space. So with FS2, I basically started off by porting that approach, no longer being able to rely on it being just a axis aligned rectangle. It could be any kind of convex and even non-convex polygon, but the core algorithm stayed true, and that ended up producing really nice looking levels in a similar way. But the stuff that FS2 really adds is it's kind of like quite a lot of Photoshop style layerings, etc. So you can define a space as having an outside, inverted commas, texture, which is another kind of generator where maybe our level designer has made a whole huge level of forest or a whole huge level of car park, and it takes a bit of that and plonks it in a bit of level where there's a car park. So we can create more complex spaces that have different kinds of areas, like parks and roads and car parks and factories, and put them all together, and it's actually a really strongly layered process of putting lots and lots of different things on. It's hard to describe, but it works really well.